It's very early in the morning, and I'm in a part of Athens a lot of tourists don't go. It's a bit of a walk out from the historic centre, quick Freddo espresso on the way. So I was at Larissa train station. This is kind of the main Athens train station, but Greece is not known for its trains. I've not been able to get a full picture of how much more there was operating pre-2008 crash. I do recall that despite there being a distinctive rail line around Nafplio and Argos and just that part of the Argolid when we were there, nothing appeared to have used it for years. For most of the country, you just have to use the KTEL buses. But there are still a few train lines running. So how's this for a start? Bear in mind, this is not a part of Athens where everyone speaks fluent English. We are somewhat spoiled in other parts of the country. So I went to the counter and said, hi, could I get a return ticket to Chaldika? There was a pause. The guy behind the counter looked highly confused. I was saved mostly because despite being in the nation's capital, there's not a great number of routes. Eventually, after a couple of reiterations, he said, do you mean Halkeitha? Ooh, yeah, apart from having those consonants the wrong way round there, I had just not got that right in the slightest. The guy wasn't even angry. He just looked like hurt and confused. So yeah, that's my bad there. One return to Halkeitha, please. So yes, this was my first train ride in Greece, and the context you may have caught, I was in Athens for a few days, done various things there. I'd also nipped over to Aegina Island. Both of those episodes are just behind this on the channel, so go and have a watch of those later. But on this day, I was on a train for a couple of hours to do a Greek island that does a pretty good job of camouflaging itself as the mainland. This, which is rendered approximately Euboea, looks like another finger of the many that project southeast from the Greek mainland, and while, yes, its shore faces the mainland with not much distance between, at its narrowest point it doesn't actually meet. Just bear in mind, by the way, this is not just significant in Greece, where it's the second largest island just behind Crete, but it's actually the sixth largest island in the Mediterranean. So this is worth knowing about, but almost no one knows this is here, at least as far as the English-speaking world goes. So this channel is the Euripus Strait, and there's a pretty swift tide that comes up and down this. In fact, it reverses several times a day. It's crossed at its narrowest point by this bridge, which is only 40 metres wide. Loosely, that's about a couple of tennis courts. It's so close, in fact, that there's been various bridges built here since as far back as 410 BC. There are other crossing points too, so there's this, the new Euripus Bridge, to prevent all the road traffic having to funnel both through the urban area and across this comparatively narrow old bridge. So yes, about 2 hours on the train, and not much of interest to report. The train was nice enough. I mean, there's no indication that this wouldn't just be spread all over the country, but hey, if there's one place that demonstrates how rail doesn't always work, even if it should, it's England, so I'm not about to point fingers. Eventually, the island came into sight. The line terminates just short of the old bridge. It was just after 9 in the morning, and at first blush, it was not easy to get the measure of the place. It was kind of busy. As I said, this is not a part of Greece that expects tourists. It's definitely not unpleasant, but you forget that the ease you feel moving around Greece usually is because you're being handheld much more than you realise. Anyway, before I really saw the town, and without good coffee options in my immediate vicinity, for just a minute I crossed onto Euboea, pretty much just to get a better look at the bridge. But I actually headed back the other way and up the hill facing the strait. It's a little bit steep, but at the top, Carababa Castle, clearly named by people accustomed to speaking in tongues. It's a funny place. It looks fairly Venetian in character, it feels like many of the same beats. It is in fact an Ottoman construction, though paradoxically it was a Venetian engineer, Gerolamo Galappo, who built it. Despite an attempt in 1688, at a time when the Venetians were seeing significant gains in the Morea, they failed to retake this. And despite the castle itself being a great visit, I was feeling particularly fortunate that its museum was open, and this is an absolute treasure trove of particularly medieval stonework. There were lions of St. Mark. Wow, it's been a long time since we've done a lion watch, and we're not going to do one here. Last time we were catching people up on our Venetian series. There is a huge amount to see there. I can't unpack it all. Here, it's an incredible story. You're just going to have to load up that playlist and give it a watch later. The sad part of Halkeitha, it's really a bit of a lost city. It's a place that should have walls and some old churches, maybe the occasional ancient Hellenistic ruins, sort of like Thessaloniki that I'm flashing up at the moment, if not quite as big. But instead, there's Well, there's not nothing, but the historic traces of the town are few and faint. And while it was taken by the Ottomans in a dramatic siege in 1470, it looked like it was going to be lifted by the Venetian fleet, but ultimately was not. Another story that we'll need to wait till we get to hear in the Venetian series. But yeah, it turned out the worst enemy of Halkeitha was not the Janissaries, but the bulldozer. I've not been able to find a better version of this image, but as recently as the early 20th century, the castle, depicted in many sources, was still standing. But the construction of the modern town just ripped it all down. All the seawalls, the gate, just gone. Almost unthinkable, but other than the base of the towers here, which can still be seen beneath the old bridge, it's all vanished. But yeah, the Karababa exhibition was really special. It's the best possible introduction to ancient Halkeitha, but there's a lot more ancient stuff to come during the day from across the island as well. But speaking of introductions, we haven't actually done one yet, so... Crossing into the town, one of the first things I came across was the Emirzade Mosque. This is in relatively good shape. The minaret is long gone. It was not open to visit when I was there. Round the back, a rather ugly assortment of razor wire sat uncomfortably behind it. I was looking for this older church, but it was undergoing construction, so not the greatest view. And there are a couple other bits I will get to another time. Eventually, I stopped off for a Freddo espresso and was feeling pretty great. Because there's never a guarantee that public transport is going to work out or things go to plan, I often have this moment where I'm just flooded with relief and joy that I've actually made it to where I'm going, especially if the sun is shining. I did manage to get into the archaeological museum in town. There is more than one. It was somewhat small, but it had some great things like this Hellenistic pebble mosaic and a huge amount from Halkeitha and nearby. And the staff there were also just incredibly sweet, so left with a huge grin, but I needed to get walking to the eastern edge of town. I pretty much always end up wishing I had more footage of a place. I love to see street footage like this because it takes me right back. To be honest, walking with the camera I use never really generates usable footage. Even if you try and stabilize it, it's just not pleasant to watch. But then again, this sort of stuff doesn't make for a particularly compelling episode. It's quite prosaic. But having lamented the destruction of medieval Halkeitha, the outskirts of town have a real surprise. These spans are a surviving Roman aqueduct. It does appear the Venetians and maybe Ottomans may have had a hand at patching it up, but it's a real sight to see. It does have the main road running through it, so you have to watch your step a little. On a day where I had a bit more time, I might have shot up the old Acropolis of Halkeitha, but it's pretty bare up there, fairly little to see. There are some ruins to see in the centre of the bus station, but had to not get too distracted with those, as I was having to navigate pretty infrequent bus routes in a building with little to no text in English. So had to sort of smile sweetly and get help from the attendants, but managed to make the bus I intended. Definitely made for locals, not really designed to interface with tourists at all, so I was very grateful that everyone was gracious with my lack of Greek. And soon we were heading through the countryside of Euboea. While it took some doing, I definitely wanted to get beyond just Halkeitha and see more of the island. Now, it is 180 kilometres end to end, so I was under no illusion I'd be doing everything I wanted in a single day. If you want to see what I'm really itching to get back and see, look up the dragon houses. However, there were some more ancient places to catch, and I'd soon hopped off in Eretria. Maybe I've not quite got the emphasis there, but it's tricky not to get this crossed over with the African nation of Eritrea. Just a simple swap of vowels there. As far as ancient sites, this is an absolute jackpot. Pardon me if all we can do this episode is list them off, but there's this Tholos in the square, followed by the Temple of Apollo, then this plot in the northern quarter, and if this all seems a bit princesses in another castle, please don't misunderstand. While our travel episodes are a bit more of an outline of the ancient history of places, we are building all of these towards just a massive series on ancient Greece. Everything from the Cycladic cultures through the Minoans, Mycenaeans, yes, classical era Greece, and even beyond that, series on the Romans and Byzantines. Those are just way out of control in terms of everything we need to see. Just trust the process and drop a subscribe. We are working on it. So, some of the ruins here were covered, which you don't often see. Would have liked to have photographed these, but it's probably for the best. There are buildings built to shelter these mosaics. Those are pretty great, and dropped into the archaeological museum at this point just in time. There was a lot there. Definitely helped explain the area better. But yeah, saving the absolute showstopper till last, the main archaeological area, which was not open, if I recall, but got some great views from both the exterior fence and from above. The theatre is, of course, the first thing to grab the eye. As you've been seeing, Eretria, which keeps getting auto-corrected on my damn script, was a significant polis, rising to particular prominence in the 500s BC. Though it was almost levelled by the Persians in 490, it was rebuilt shortly after. As we've said, this is a part of Greece I feel fairly confident you will rarely have heard of, but it is far from a backwater. I was also glad to get slightly better views of the Acropolis, but it was getting later. I'd been walking near constantly almost all day, and it was July. It was extraordinarily hot, and I had a very particular bus that I couldn't miss. So I didn't have time to climb the Acropolis here, but you can see substantial walls of a settlement even more ancient than the polis below. With that, I had very, very much earned an island. You can often tell from whether or not they've had the branding update how prominent a coffee island is in a place, but I can never not get excited to drink here. And topped up with a Freddo cappuccino, I just had time to jog down to the water in advance of the bus. I mean, I was describing similar from last time, but I was just feeling such an incredible joy being here today. The satisfaction of not only getting somewhere that is not as easy for tourists to navigate and seeing incredible ancient things, it just feels incredible to be here. Obviously the blue skies, the gorgeous landscape, but also to be seeing all these things and doing something that feels meaningful. The platform has been treating us like garbage so far this year. Episodes that before it would happily platform in front of 30,000, it now shows to fewer than 200. You can actually see the moment it turns off the taps when you're looking in the analytics on the back page. And given this is not adjudicated by actual human behaviour or preferences, but by some entirely opaque lines of code with which you can neither reason nor mediate, the line is always, well, it must just be you. Do something dumber for the title and thumbnail. No, go on, dumber. No, dumber. Come on, really debase yourself. Just pretend to be the biggest dribbling idiot and also tacitly insult the intelligence of your entire prospective audience while you go. Go on, now, cover yourself in actual human shit. This is the platform on which we find ourselves having to try and compete. But you're here and you're seeing this, and that does mean a lot. So there's so much more we'd love to show you if we actually get the chance. You know how this works. And while opinions go back and forth how much this actually affects the meta, if you wouldn't mind leaving a comment just to let us know you're here, it offsets the comments of people just being unpleasant for the sake of it, and it's a little encouragement that this hasn't all been for nothing. Right, well, not entirely done for the day. There was more walking, and I was taking a risk with the buses, but there was something I had to see, so I hopped off some miles short of Halkitha in Vasiliko. A bit of a walk on my hands. That's a really weird way to say that. I was not walking on my hands. It was about 30 minutes south of town, and there were two places that are a little bit niche. There's the Heroon of Lefkandi. The Heroon has a covering over it, and the remains here are pretty slight. You can see I'm fighting the light and shadow somewhat. Not instantly apparent what the significance is here. To explain that, we need to walk a little further. There were some resorty bits by the water here, and despite being July, it was not super busy. I've heard it suggested that while tourists all go to the Cyclades and other island chains, the Greeks, if they're not heading north to cooler climates, head to Euboea. And this appeared to be one such spot. Look, beautiful place, no doubt, but as you've gathered, I wasn't simply there for a beach. And skirting around onto a fairly nondescript headland, I was genuinely worried I might not be able to find this, but at long last, this is Xeropolis. It might not be much to look at, but it's almost singular in ancient Greek history. This, as well as the Heroon, are from the Greek Dark Age, so that needs some explaining. If we dial back to the Bronze Age Mediterranean, we have the great cultures of the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, the Egyptians. They're all doing their Bronze Age things, but then a cascade of much debated causes took them all out. With the Egyptians somewhat holding on, but in a diminished capacity. Just look into the Bronze Age collapse, a lot of choice for videos on that, you won't struggle. But while all across what we now know as Greece, the culture we call the Mycenaean, it's so tedious having to put all of these in parentheses. If you have caveats, just keep them to yourself for now. This is a summary. So yes, the great Mycenaean power centres collapse, but here on Euboea, we still have activity, a settlement during what is known as the Greek Dark Age. The period following this collapse, where putting together a picture of what is going on is very difficult archaeologically and basically impossible historiographically, as no one is writing anything anymore that we know of. This is where some of the light held on for a little longer. There's a lot of question about the Heroon, but it may be a monumental tomb, somewhat in the style of the Grand Tholos burials we've been catching all over the country. The Greece that would emerge, you, at the back there with your hand up, You're going to tell me there was no Greece, only a loose collection of city-states grouped around a Hellenic identity. Well, thank you kindly for that very well-known interruption. You may put your hand down now. I'd give you a gold star sticker, but we both know you just eat it. But yes, the Greece that would emerge would be very different to the Mycenaean world. Different language, different DNA, just different everything. But here on Euboea, pretty far from all the Greek places we give our attention, be they Athens, Sparta, Delphi, all of those, the Bronze Age culture endured at a time where it had died out almost everywhere else. Well, with that bit of eulogising, I was walking back. Still not done, actually. I'll admit, feet were hurting a bit at this point. Back to Basilico and headed into some tight out-of-the-way streets, and yes, there we go. This is a Venetian-era tower. It's one of a great many across the island, which was a Venetian possession for about 250 years until the fall of Chalkitha in 1470. And I was even in line of sight with some of the other towers. There's a great many. Just the biggest shout out to Castra.eu. We're going to have to talk about them sometime, but absolute legends of the game. As you can see, it's a lot of towers. This was Euboea in one day. When we can make it back here, that's just going to be a good time all round. So I was a little unsure what I was going to do next. In getting off at Left Candy, I'd put myself out of sync with the very few buses that go back and forth here. I mean, it's about a 2-hour walk to Chalkitha. Didn't really have that in me at this stage. But got back to the main street of Basilico, pondering my next move, and oh, there's a taxi. Oh, hey, could I get a ride to Chalkitha? And okay, we're off. There it is. Problem solved. So it was back to Chalkitha. Big relief that I'd managed to make that journey, and that connection wasn't quite clear how that was going to work. And yes, there is another bigger archaeological museum in Chalkitha, not far from the bus station. And no, I did not have time to go in there. Opening times, bus times, et al. Job for next time. Just had a chance in advance of my train to get a drink at the bar that sits where the Great Gate of Chalkitha once stood. And then I was back on the train, back to Athens, and watched the Athens episode. So, while, yes, a one-day summary of a place is always going to be insufficient, for my English-speaking audience, don't lie, very few of you knew this was here. And I'm making no claims to be an extra special boy for seeing this, but as you've seen, this was well worth seeing, and now you know about it too. So that's cool. There's a lot I've left on the table as well. There's the whole thing of both Chalkitha and, to some extent, the island being known as Negroponte. That's mainly thanks to a linguistic corruption rather than the bridge at Chalkitha actually being black. Yeah, just a whole lot more. Again, this is a summary. There's a lot more of Greece still to see. It's a point of pride. There's plenty more that you can catch in our ever-growing Greek playlist. In this week just gone, we were actually seeing the Dodecanese for the first time in both Kos and Rhodes. Just a huge amount of amazing stuff from there. I'm going to need some time to get those done. But in the meantime, the Cyclades, Thessaloniki, Crete, and a bunch more, it's all in there. And if you've enjoyed the music in the background, it's ours who make all the music for these episodes, and you can catch it on bandcamp.com. That's kind of our Patreon, so if you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. You can kind of keep up with what we're doing on more of a week-by-week basis at Blue Sky, so follow us there. And yes, a subscribe would be very much appreciated, but to be honest, you're probably going to need to hit the bell, otherwise you might just never hear from us again. The platform keeps burying our stuff, so if you don't have notifications on, you may just never see it. Anyway, just really appreciate having you along, and we'll catch you very soon.